hello, world. What's up? Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Matt Forte. And hey, we are here live at the Build studio in New York City. Based on Dr. Lisa Sanders' hugely popular column in the New York Times Magazine, Diagnosis follows various patients on their respective journeys toward finding a diagnosis and potentially a cure for their mysterious illnesses. Now, this is a super powerful, uplifting show with a refreshingly optimistic look at a positive way that technology is impacting humanity. All 7 episodes drop on Netflix this Friday, and I'm super excited to have with me right now the great Dr. Lisa Sanders and producer Jonathan Chinn are in the building. How do you guys feel about that? I'm excited. Are you excited as well? I just want to make sure. Okay. They're excited. I believe you're excited. We're going to bring them out in just a second. But first, I also believe we have a trailer for the show. So, hey, let's go ahead and run that clip.
What if social media could save lives? Right now, there are literally millions of people struggling with undiagnosed medical conditions.
I'm Brittany, Kamaya's mom. She's 6 years old. She's paralyzed anywhere from 3 to 20 seconds, over 300 times a day.
I was in the Gulf War. I served 8 years, and now I'm losing my memory.
Every time the deja vu happens, I feel my eyes roll in the back of my head, and then I flatline.
Sadie has this incurable disease that the only thing you can do is, remove half of her brain. How could that be the only thing you do to a kid?
My body's going through something. The doctors are like, we can't help you.
I want to know if somebody else has this.
They need something different, the kind of thinking that happens usually outside the hospital. I'm Dr. Lisa Sanders, and I'm a physician at Yale. And for the past 15 years, I've written a column for the New York Times Magazine about patients who have mysterious symptoms, but I always wanted to go the next step. Using the internet, we have the ability to harness all the intelligence of people around the planet to get some answers.
I was thrilled to see that many responses.
It's what we hoped for.
Never, ever, ever give up.
There is somebody out there that understands.
The symptoms align perfectly with the things that I've experienced.
There's another mom out there like me that was looking for an answer. We're not the only ones.
You gotta keep a positive attitude.
It's good news.
We can create a movement. There's hope. 1, 2. Are you trying to kick me?
No! I did not do it on purpose.
I know.
Ladies and gentlemen, please make a ridiculous amount of noise for our guests, Dr. Lisa Sanders and Jonathan Chinn right here. Come on, do it up. This show, I said it in the green room, I'll say it again, congratulations on a fantastic series. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. You've done an incredible job. I'm really excited to talk to you about the process of bringing it from the column, from the page to the screen, as it were. We'll get into that in a moment. But first and foremost, congrats on your book that just released yesterday.
Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. Is that your fourth book? Is that third book? Okay, third book. Is it old hat? It's boring at this point. Third book. You've done it before.
No, it's never boring.
Never.
To me, anyway.
Right.
And I hope to my readers it's not.
Yes. Well, I saw it was our #1 seller. I was looking on Amazon when I was looking up the do my research there. So people are excited about it for sure. So congrats on that. This. Let's start, like I said, let's start at the very beginning. You started your column, I want to say it was 2002, I think I saw it, right? So there you go. So why now bring it from, page to screen? Why start the show now for you?
Wow. Well, this has been something that I've cared about since 2002, and it's gone through a lot of different stages. I mean, there was House.
Yeah.
That was based on my column, and that ran until
Famously
2012.
House, yeah. 8 seasons of that show.
Yeah. No, it was fantastic. And then I did this other column called Think Like a Doctor, which was my first voyage into, my first venture into crowdsourcing, where I would present a solved case, but I would only present it up until right before the diagnosis was made. And then I would stop and say, what do you think she has or he has? Yeah. And people would write in. I mean, hundreds of people would write in. Wow. And that made me think that maybe crowdsourcing would work for an unknown case, because those were all solved cases.
How long ago would you, when would you say was the first time you had that experience, the first crowdsourcing experience? Was that?
I think I started it in
ballpark
2010.
2010, yeah. Which even, it doesn't sound like that long ago. I mean, neither does 2002, but it's a different planet when you look at the technology that's available and who's out there. Jonathan, you've done tons of amazing documentaries you've worked on. Very recently, LA 92, and I love Murder Mountain, also on Netflix. Well done. What brought you to Diagnosis, sir?
A certain producer called Scott Rudin brought Diagnosis to us. Scott Rudin, who is obviously a prolific producer of film and stage and now television. And, you know, he's a guy who just has impeccable instincts. And I think he was a big fan of the column. And, you know, as sometimes happens in these creative minds, you know, he thought that there was something in it, that there was possibly a good unscripted series. It's not actually his area of expertise, but he had the instinct that it could be turning it into a good unscripted series. And so he reached out to us and asked us if we were interested. And he said that he'd already sort of, made arrangements with the Times to option the article. And I mean, it was a short phone call. We just said, yes, we're definitely interested, and met with the Times and with Lisa. And so that's how it came to us. And I mean, it was really, it was just clear from the minute that we spoke to Scott that this had the potential to be really groundbreaking, really big, but also really accessible. And we had a great team. I mean, we had Scott Rudin, we had the New York Times, we had, Lisa, and then, eventually Netflix, who, have been really supportive of the process. And so that's sort of the story of it.
One of the things you guys really responded to, I was telling you how I felt watching it, that I was just so excited because it was refreshingly optimistic is how I described it, just because there's so much about technology and how it's impacting us. To see in practice a very positive use of the technology, to be leveraged in such a positive way, is a really nice thing that we don't see too often. Did you know from the very beginning, was that something you were excited to show, or was it something that kind of presented itself as you told these stories and went through?
I mean, from our perspective, and obviously, Lisa's talked a little bit about her journey, and this show is really based in Lisa's journey, which is why, as we went along, we realized, we thought, who should be the face of the show? Well, obviously, it turned out it should be Lisa, because not only is she a doctor, but also this is based on her journey. But I think in answer to your question, absolutely, that was the thing during that very first phone conversation with Scott, and in talking to the Times and Lisa. I think we felt that this show, if we succeeded, which was a big if, because we were about to do something that nobody had really done, and certainly to crowdsource medical diagnosis and make a TV show at the same time is kind of nuts. But but the goal was absolutely to present technology as a force of good. And it's not only a force of good, but to present an environment and certain conditions where technology could actually help people and maybe even save lives. And so, absolutely, from the beginning, that was a big impetus in the way that we approach the storytelling.
In medicine, technology is a huge plus. We know more today than we knew even yesterday or a year ago or 5 years ago. I mean, it's a whole new world almost every day because of technology. The story I'm writing now is about a woman who, if she had presented 5 years ago, would have gotten a completely different diagnosis, because this disease didn't even exist. And so she would have gotten the wrong diagnosis, but the only one that they knew. So it's really amazing. So I have very good feelings about technology.
So I guess that almost answers the question that I had of what were your expectations. We see a little bit of how surprised we are by the response here in the show, but if you go even a little bit further back to 2010, just your expectations going into crowdsourcing, what were you hoping it would be, and did it live up to that? Has it exceeded what you thought it would be?
So, the first time I saw crowdsourcing, I wish I could take credit for the idea, but it was actually this really smart Harvard professor got quite ill, and he decided to crowdsource his own illness. And so he took his story to this website frequented by doctors called Kevin MD. And boom, the story went up. Within hours, he got a diagnosis. And I wrote about that in my column, and I thought, we could do that. Yeah. We could do that because we don't have an audience. We have an audience that has doctors in it, but we have so much more than just doctors in the readership of the New York Times. Yeah.
How did you feel about becoming the face of the show? Obviously, this is your column. You've inspired all these different things. But when you went to House, the character of House, I don't get the correlation between you and House and Hugh Laurie. So obviously your stories were there. Yeah. But how did you feel about being the face of it and telling the story and being a part of the story and on camera and doing all that?
It sort of evolved over time. I mean, from my perspective, these were always my stories. This is the story that I've been telling my whole career. Totally. So I didn't think about being the face of it. I just thought of it as mine. Yeah. Jonathan might have a different feeling about it. He might have thought it was his, but from my perspective, it was mine.
It was a really organic process, I have to say. Again, I've done a lot of different things over the years. Some things sort of feel like other things you've done, and you kind of get into a track. And this was one of those projects where it was a little bit like this abyss out there. It was like this was high stakes. I don't know a lot about medicine, and so I knew that we absolutely needed Lisa to be there as somebody who was advocating for the show, also advocating for the patients, and advocating for medicine as a sort of establishment, because it was important for us not to sort of say that, well, you don't need doctors, you just need crowdsourcing. That's not the message here. This is an additive thing that can actually integrate and help the medical establishment figure stuff out. But yeah, I mean, I think it just evolved organically, and partly because we had no preconceived ideas of exactly what the show was. It's hard to explain, but it's almost like some part of the creative process sometimes not knowing opens you up to do the organic right thing, because you don't have this idea in your head of like, no, this should feel like this. We kind of just went where it took us a little bit, which took a little time. Yeah. So, and it just made sense. And Lisa's also very good on camera, and I don't mean that. I just mean that she's good at articulating complicated medical things, which you want the viewer to sort of understand that quite quickly, so they can remain in the emotional part of the story.
There's a lot in there I want to unpack, but one of the things that I definitely want to touch on first is, you're right, this show does a fantastic job of highlighting the necessity for doctors, because once you do open it up to the crowd, one of the things I was fascinated by is, as you get these hundreds, sometimes thousands of responses, how do you, and without really saying this, you kind of see a little bit of this, how do you know which ones to kind of take with a grain of salt and which ones are, this person knows their stuff, we need to listen? They're all video responses. There's no fast way to parse that data. You've got to watch it. You've got to see it. What was that process like for you and your team to go through all of this information and say, okay, this is helpful. This person means well.
This person's crazy.
Like, how do you sort all that? What was that like?
Oh, well, thank God I had really, really smart producers who were helping, because I could never have gone through all those responses.
I couldn't imagine, yeah.
And so really smart people sat down and sort of grouped them. I mean, mostly they came in chunks that were similar, and we were able to aggregate them and go through them in a reasonable way. And as a doctor, what I was looking for from the crowd was to come up with a lot of possibilities. You want to cast a wide net, but then once you've cast the wide net, you want to go through it and you go, no, maybe, yes. Not, yes, that's the right diagnosis, but yes, that's an avenue worth pursuing. Maybe this is worth pursuing, and, that person means well.
Yeah, I think Lisa's also selling herself a little short. She's somebody with years and years and years of experience at looking at undiagnosed cases. So her instincts were really our North Star. Yeah. So yes, we did have great producers working with Lisa, but it was we always went off her instincts, because again, she was looking after the integrity of the show, but she's also a doctor who really just instinctively is sort of like, no, I just something, and 9 times out of 10, Lisa pointed us in the right direction.
Could you have even fathomed a world where this was possible when you started your column in 2002? That that you would get all this data brought to you. You'd be on the show and all the this whole thing has just got to be wild. It's got to be pretty surreal.
It's been amazing. I mean, it's all I really wanted when I first started writing this column was to show people that the kind of uncertainty that the medical world was filled with, because people were surprised and kind of disappointed when, most of the time you go to the doctor, you have a problem, and the doctor goes, oh, it's obviously blah.
Take this, and
Yeah,
you're fine.
you're fine.
That's it, yeah.
And so when people don't get that, they would be anxious and feeling like they were alone, like they were the only person who was a mystery.
Feeling, yeah.
It is a very scary feeling, and I don't want to take away from that, but I did want people to see that they are not alone.
Yeah.
That as difficult as this is for a patient, it's also kind of an exciting detective story for the doctor. And an important one, not a silly, trivial one, but, lives literally depend on you.
Yeah.
But it's still an intellectual challenge and kind of cool.
Yeah. But I think those two stories are told very well in this show. You see what that's like on both sides of being able to sort of grab all this data, and you see the excitement of we have these people here that suggested this. I never thought of that. You see all that, but then you also, I think maybe not for the first time, but first time for me, seeing the story of the patient's perspective and how scary it can be and what that really is like. John, talk about capturing those stories, and you talk about how this kind of grew organically. What was it like as that was unfolding in front of you? What were you guys thinking?
Well, I mean, I think we always knew that the medical mystery was the sort of engine but the real fuel of it, was really the emotional stories. So I mean, I just hired people who had good experience in telling stories, complicated stories with characters, people who done a lot of observational filming rather than studio filming and stuff like that. So, and same on the editorial side, hired people to work with the material in terms of the people who are helping shape the stories, who were going to be focused on the characters. So that was always something that was really important to us. Like, the characters were the key, because you have to build sympathy. And there's also complexity and nuance to these stories, and the dynamics within the family. Like, what does a family look like that's dealing with a 10-year-old undiagnosed condition? That affects a family in a real way. So the medicine is really important, and that's the sort of thing that's like, ooh, I wonder what it is. But I think for the series to really succeed for us, it was important that the characters came across as really three-dimensional people who were relatable, but also going through something really extraordinary with their loved ones too. Yeah.
Oh, I saw you raise your mic. I didn't want to cut you off.
I was just going to say that, that's why, people say, well, what did they have? What do they have? To just reduce their stories to the diagnosis, I think does a disservice to their real stories. Their story is so much more than that one word. Yeah. So, and this show gave us a chance to show that.
To show those stories, yeah. You talk about the show kind of forming organically as it went, and it by no means is an indictment of the American healthcare system. That is not the message of the show. I just think through the nature of some of the stories, sometimes it's kind of highlighted the differences in healthcare systems across particularly the first episode, when she's on that phone call with Italy and she's like, how much is this going to cost? And they're like, oh, no, you're sick and we don't know why. Just come here and we'll help you.
It's free.
Yeah, it's free. We'll take care of you.
It is in the rest of the world, no?
Yeah, what do you mean? How much did we just help you? Just come here and get help. As that started to present itself, were you concerned of the story becoming politicized in any way, or were you, well, let's not shy away from that. That's the reality of this situation. Let's show that and make sure that's there. How did you handle that as that became part of the story?
I mean, the latter. I mean, it's whether one wants to make an indictment on the American healthcare system, it is broken. I mean, I don't think anybody, that's not a controversial statement. And it's not because of the doctors. It's not necessarily because of the insurance companies. It's not because of the pharmaceuticals. It is just a system that doesn't work based on the wealth of this country, the opportunities in this country, and the resources of this country. It just doesn't work. So when you're dealing with people who have not received answers for something that's very serious, you're going to come head to head with healthcare system, because that's what they're in. And there's a story about a veteran in this series that sort of gets into the VA and their responsibilities. There's obviously stories about people that it seems like maybe there are answers coming from outside of the country where the healthcare system is different. So, again, we're not trying to bring anything down. This is not an expose. I don't think saying there are problems with the American healthcare system is not an expose.
This just in.
Exactly. But we didn't want to shy away from it and just kind of whitewash it, and because it has a big impact in these characters' lives. So it's not really telling the story if you're going to say, well, we don't want to talk about that. We don't want you to talk about the issues you're having with your healthcare provider or your insurance company. I think it's part of the integrity of these stories. That was from our point of view. Obviously, Lisa's in the medical industry, so she probably has a different perspective on it.
I don't know that it's so different. I mean, to me, this was not. If I was going to do a series about what's wrong with the American medical system, I would not have done it from this point of view. But, in the course of helping these people find their way towards a diagnosis, we ran across their problems with the way the system works now. And I think that was an important part of their story.
It's a great way to phrase it, that this isn't necessarily a larger picture of what is wrong with the system. It's just this is one part of the system that they're experiencing trouble with and they're having problems with.
And I'm glad you brought it up, because I think, other than being hopefully a compelling series, it's also an opportunity to again have the conversation. And it's like, here are some examples of where things work and don't work. So we welcome the conversation from our point.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that you don't really think about. But yeah, if you're seeing doctor after doctor and not getting answers, it gets expensive. You end up in debt. It's a very scary situation. It's a new level of stress. It's just a whole cycle of stuff. One of the last things before we go to audience Q&A that I really was curious about is, it's not a TV show. It's real life. Sometimes we don't get answers to the questions. Sometimes some of the mysteries are still unsolved and things of that nature. You've made a career of solving mysteries. How do you know when you've hit a wall? How do you know when you have to walk away and say, I don't have it yet, I'll come back another time and figure it out? It's got to be a very difficult decision to make, or a realization to have that I've gone as far as I can with this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah. So what do you do in that moment? How do you handle that? What do you think? How do you process it? How do you move forward?
You just say, and whenever I see a patient, I say, I'm just me. I'm just an internist. I have an internist training, and I'm willing to give time and energy to your, to trying to help you solve your problem. But if we can't figure it out, you're going to have to keep looking.
Yeah.
So I say that from the beginning, because I know that when you have a person with a problem that lots of doctors have taken on and not been able to solve, then there's at least a decent chance that I am also not going to be able to solve it. That's in my own practice. For these are the most difficult cases ever. Yeah. And, I think that if we hadn't gotten the answers that we had gotten, they wouldn't have answers. Yeah. So
that's the other thing too, is you watch this and you go, these are the most difficult cases, but it's just the amount of people with these types of cases. I can't tell you how many doctors tell me, don't Google this. Don't Google, it's the worst thing you do is Google it. What is the worst thing? What is the worst thing you could do? Is it not Google it? Is it to not be your own advocate and you're not do your own research? What do you think on that perspective when someone says, oh, don't Google that stuff, don't look that stuff up?
I hear that patients get told that a lot. I don't know anybody who would say that, because really, you want a patient to be involved in their own health. You want them to be involved smartly. You don't want them to go wackydoctor.com. You want to...
Which is a great website, but it's not helpful.
This is not a commercial for wackydoctor.com.
But they do watch over at wackydoctor.com. I know that.
Right. But so I think that the most important thing that people can do is go to places that are going to give them good information instead of bad information. Like, don't go to the things that have that little ad thing next to them. One server does have kind of a hierarchy. Like, can I say?
Say whatever you want.
Okay, so Google has this very smart algorithm of elevating the more responsible kinds of sites over other sites. Yeah. But really, my recommendation to my own patients is to go to any site that has a .gov on it, because NIH.gov and CDC.gov, those are the places that have high quality, reliable, and useful information.
Yeah. I guess that's one of the biggest challenges is identifying, especially now, knowing when you're getting quality, useful, reputable information.
Especially now because so much of the bad information takes on the trappings of good information. So it's really hard for a layperson or even an expert to know what is BS and what is rock solid just from reading it. You have to know something.
Yeah. Well, we have a couple of questions I want to get to, but before, just again, reiterate, August 16th, the whole series drops on Netflix. Diagnosis is there. It is a fantastic show. I am no expert, but I'm telling you right now, you watch one of these, and you guys did a great job, too. That they get you hooked. You keep going. I don't know how you made a docu-series bingeable, but you did. And you keep watching, and it's really fascinating stuff, and you're doing amazing work. Thank you so much. Kate, I got time? All right, let's do a couple of questions. I got some in the room. First one is coming from right over yonder. Go for it.
I wanted to ask, what's the most inspirational case of unsolved diagnosis that you've seen in your career?
That's still unsolved? Oh, to me, that's almost not inspirational, just the fact that it's not solved. But, there are so many. That's like asking, which is your favorite child? Come on, you can tell me. It's just between us. Most cases have really compelling, important qualities in the patients, in their stories. So I can't tell you one. I mean, it's not like I secretly have one. Really, whichever one I'm thinking about now is my absolute favorite. I've never seen a better case.
Let me ask you a follow-up. Great question, by the way. Thank you. But let me ask you a follow-up there. How did you decide, with only 7 episodes, with all the cases that are out there, how did you land on the 7 or the cases that you landed on? What was that process look like? A while?
Well, I mean, it was sort of somewhat of a process of self-selection, obviously. But again, it's hard to describe how hard it was to... it's hard to make a good TV show. We were crowdsourcing diagnosis, finding patients, and then crowdsourcing their diagnosis. So we needed to tick some boxes so that they would work not just for the medical part. They had to be an interesting story. They had to be good characters. But we had to see a way, at least in our dreams, that we might be able to help. And so, wherever the vector is, where those things all come together, the ones that had the most in the middle, those are the ones that we picked. But again, character was important. So, it was important that there were, characters outside of just the patient that we could also interact with, family and stuff like that, because that helps build a story. So it was a process of elimination, but we went through a lot of choices. There are lots of people out there with undiagnosed conditions that are looking for help. So, no shortage of that.
While they were going through that, did you ever weigh in and veto or say, oh, this person has to? I don't care if there's no characters. I know this is a great story. Did you jump into that, or did you let them do their thing? Like, what was it, collaborative? How
She
did that
jumped
work?
in. She definitely jumped in.
I'm just the shy, retiring sort that never has an opinion about these kinds of things.
I find that hard to believe.
There were some cases where I thought that we would be unlikely to do any better than the doctors that they'd already seen. Yeah. But there were clearly cases where I was sure there was a gettable diagnosis. I wasn't right 100% of the time, but that doesn't mean I wasn't sure 100% of the time.
Still thought you were right up until that moment. Got time for one more? All right, let me do one more question. Come on down.
Hi. I was curious if there was a time or moment that made you realize you wanted to become a doctor, and when did you realize that you wanted to segue into investigative journalism?
There is a moment. It didn't come out exactly that moment, but, I was a television producer before I went to medical school.
And I was a doctor before I was a television producer. No, I wasn't. Just kidding.
Somebody here is not telling the truth. Up to you. But, I was working with this correspondent, and we were doing something on whitewater rafting, and we were filming, and he disappeared off the camera. And the cameraman was like going, oh, where is he? And we found him, and he was on the side of the river pulling this elderly woman out of the water. He'd seen her fall off her raft, and he had pulled her over to the side. And then he started doing something I had never seen before in real life. He started doing chest compressions, and, he resuscitated her. And, after a few chest compressions and a few breaths, she turned her head and vomited, and lots of water and other things came out, and then She sat up, and I thought, he just saved her life. And, it had never occurred to me that I would want to save somebody's life. I mean, it's not like I thought, oh, I don't want to save people's life. It just never crossed my mind. And that was the first time I thought, maybe there's something in there for me. It took me a few years, but I got there.
Thank you so much for your question. It's kind of it's crazy when you think about him saving that one person's life, inspiring you, and now all these lives. You've just like the ripple of that butterfly effect of that one moment in time. It's pretty crazy. I don't have a question or anything around it. I'm just saying something stupid out loud. Guys, I really enjoyed it. I said I was excited you were here. I meant it, and I very much enjoyed our time together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
For coming and hanging out with us.
Appreciate
And thank you not only for making this show, but the impact you've had in all these individuals' lives, and all the ones that we don't see in this, that I hope to see in a season 2.
There you go.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you guys for being a great audience, for hanging out with us, thinking some great questions. Yeah, no, you can applaud. You're great. Make some noise while you're doing that. Keep it going for Dr. Lisa Sanders and Jonathan Chinn. Diagnosis this Friday, Netflix. Do it up.